The first clue wasn't a blip. It was a shadow that refused to be water. Before dawn, north of San Andres Island, a Navy P-8A trawled the gray seam where night hands the sea to morning. The sensor officer marked 5 targets, unlit, in tight formation, flying mismatched relief flags that no registry could confirm. Their AIS was dead. Their papers, if they had any, were lies waiting for a port. What they carried wasn't mercy. It was money. And ruin, encrypted pings stacked up across federal networks, FBI Miami, DEA Special Operations, Southcom Giant South, Treasury Intel. The pattern analysis came back ugly, an industrial pipeline at sea. Synthetic chemicals pre-staged on the water, production pods hidden below deck, and a distribution web aimed squarely at U.S. cities. Green light. A joint directive left no poetry in it. Interdict, seize, dismantle. They called it Operation Black Current. The surface element pivoted fast. USS Resolute, a Freedom variant littoral combat ship, swung onto an intercept vector. Her flight deck spun up 2 MH-60R Seahawks, door guns locked, searchlights cold. A Reaper orbit took station higher than the clouds, glass on target and quiet as fate. On Resolute's command deck, Commander Naomi Hart watched the mosaic stitch itself together. 5 vessels in staggered line, speed steady, course dishonest. No fishing gear. No humanitarian pallets on deck. Just weathered tarps, too neat to trust. Final hail, Hart said. The bridge team broadcast the warning across VHF and loudhailer in 3 languages. No answer. No reduction in speed. A flare arced from the convoy's rear vessel, a signal not of surrender but of sequence. They're shifting, the tactical officer said. Defensive crescent. Copy, Hart replied. We're not here for theater. Execute intercept. The Seahawk slid down from the dark like hawks stooping on field mice, rotors slicing humid air. Door gunners tracked arcs, not trigger pulls. They were past wanting a fight. They were prepared for it anyway. Then came the muzzle flashes, ragged, bright, wrong. Tracer fire clawed the sky. RPG smoke uncoiled from a bow like a curse. The convoy had not come to bluff. They had come to survive a war they started. Engage, Hart said, level as a line on a chart. Resolute's Mk-110 57mm barked, the sea chewing on shockwaves as the first airburst rained steel above a gun team. The round wasn't a shout, it was a verdict. The convoy's portside trawler staggered, engines kicked, and smoke turned the moon into an ember. The Seahawks answered with short, controlled strings from GAU-21s, tearing sightlines off deck rails and pinning shooters wherever they stood. The Reaper called a mover breaking formation, northbound, fast. Weapon-free, came the authorization. A single Hellfire stitched light across the horizon and replaced a ship with a white wound that closed into steam. Boarding teams moved the second the fire lanes went quiet enough to gamble a life on a ladder. FBI maritime operators, DEA fast, and Navy VBSS climbed into heat and chemical stink. Inside steel and smoke they found the real cargo, drums stenciled with medical aid labels, but sealed like vaults, casing foam for lithium power cells, vacuum-packed precursor bricks, production notes scrawled in machine shop English and coastal Spanish. In a bolted compartment, between bulkheads that had seen storms and sins, a ledger lived where few ledgers dared. Not paper. Drives. Drives by the dozen. Names that weren't real attached to accounts that were, and the pattern everyone had learned to fear. Shell companies stapled to more shells, layered across Macau, Dubai, Cologne, and beyond. By first light the sea had gone quiet but not clean. 5 hulls either burned, bled, or bobbed in custody. Some men lay still. Others coughed and shivered with shock, wrists looped in plastic, eyes wide at the sudden smallness of the ocean. Commander Hart stood out on the weather deck and let the sun pick details from the wreckage, the warped steel, the charred bills that would never buy another soul, the sloshing buckets of counterfeit mercy. She didn't cheer. She counted. What they had prevented dwarfed the debris, but the ocean is only one border. The inland phase hit like a door kicked at 2 hinges. The addresses didn't look like fortresses, a charitable logistics hub outside Cartagena, a food additive plant in Bogotá's industrial belt, a fabrication shop that had never sold a legal screw. What they shared were power drops heavy enough to feed small towns and the steady rhythm of trucks no one wanted to explain. Colombian National Police Special Operations moved in concert with U.S. teams. Rotor wash bent palm fronds. Armored tires squealed across wet concrete. Breach lines sparked. The first rooms went loud and then clearer. Not myth, machinery. 3D printers extruding housings for tiny, relentless pumps. Clean rooms not clean enough. Labeled bins of compounds and charts for yields that had nothing to do with medicine. From a mezzanine office, agents peeled up a carpet and found not a safe but a floor. Under the floor, 12 more. Cash in bundles large enough to make accountants cry. Gold cut to travel. And those drives, again those drives, naming a network that thought itself untouchable behind keyboards and keystones. By midday the seizures forced a recalculation. What had looked like a cartel wing was something meaner, logistics warfare disguised as trade. Synthetic drugs as an instrument, not an industry. In Washington, the Situation Room screens bled red dots into lines that became routes, and routes that became proof. Interagency analysts briefed the council in careful sentences: precursor tonnage, reactor signatures, bank ladders, supplier footprints. One data point wrote itself in bolder font: defense-linked lithium tech traced back to a sanctioned Venezuelan contractor moving product under humanitarian cover. No one said it easily. Everyone understood it anyway. This wasn't just criminal. It was political. Tasking shifted at 1520. Black current widened into red wake. Cyber units and treasury hounds unleashed on the money that fed the sea. Accounts went dark across time zones. Wire rooms stalled in silence as compliance teams tried to remember which side of history their bonuses lived on. Back on Resolute, evidence teams cataloged until the daylight thinned into copper. The air smelled like hot metal, wet rope, and chemical ghosts. A boarding officer read a counterfeit manifest and shook his head at the audacity of it. Aid that only ever aided the sellers. Hart gathered her crew under a sky that had finally decided to go gentle. You'll read headlines, she told them. Some will say biggest, some will say first. None of them will say last. This didn't end today. It changed shape. Remember that. The camera in your mind pulls wide, the blackened wakes, the quiet helicopters, the white caps carrying rumors away. It's tempting to call it victory and roll credits. It isn't. It's proof of concept. Proof that vigilance can carve a canyon in a river that thought itself inevitable. What followed was less cinematic and more decisive. Indictments unsealed without ceremony. Sanctions drafted with the kind of prose that ruins yachts. Extradition packets that weighed more than rifles. And, in city blocks far from any beach, community clinics refilling overdose kits and wondering, briefly, if the next quarter might be lighter. When night finally took the Caribbean back, the ship's wake rode a thin silver line across it. Men and women who hadn't slept in 20 hours leaned against bulkheads and found the kind of silence you earned. If you're listening to this, you already understand, modern wars don't begin with flags. They start with invoices, manifests, and a ship that isn't what it says it is. They travel under borrowed names and end, if we're lucky, in the hands of people who refuse to look away. Justice does not anchor. It patrols. If you believe that vigilance should never be outsailed, add your voice, like, share, and tell the story forward. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another convoy is learning a new word: interdicted.